Uh, I think you guys did a really great job on the discussion boards. I couldn't have asked for more. You came right out of the gate doing exactly what what I hoped you would do, which is really dig deep into the issues and really talk about Socrates' situation in an objective way. He is a hero of philosophical inquiry, and it's a very a refreshing kind of change for me, and I'm sure for other instructors who teach philosophy, to see students sort of dig in and criticize Socrates' arguments in such a way that it brings into very stark a contrast, the nature of what Socrates is trying to say and how well he actually gets that across. When you look at the arguments objectively, I think you guys did a really good job of poking some serious holes in his arguments to stay and take his punishment. Um, I did want to comment. I made an announcement that I posted Sunday night, which talked about a possible interpretation of Socrates' claim that he would destroy the state if he were to disobey one of its laws. It's always a difficult thing to try and say, well, gee, how's one guy, even if he is famous, how is he going to, destroy the whole situation there in Athens? But if you read that, I think that might be a possible interpretation that we could take of Socrates that is a little bit more charitable in understanding what his thought process might have been. But it's also difficult when you're dealing with Platonic dialogues. It's not like we're dealing with the sort of thing where the arguments are laid out in such a way that they have every premise and every single sort of step outlined. These are, they're dramas. They're poetic. They are, you know, they're they're not works of prose necessarily. So that's kind of a limitation in terms of their ability to get the philosophical principles across. But they work well enough, of course. So that's one interpretation of Socrates that uh, it might be a possible way to understand his argument that he is trying to simply verify the nature of his act by showing what the logical conclusion would be if if such an act were committed by everyone, or if he gave everyone the impression that such a thing is okay. Uh, how might the collective mentality change, or how might the state change as a result of that? And theoretically, thinking about what would happen to the state, is a way to give him a concrete understanding of the nature of his own act, that it's probably not a good thing to do. That's a possibility. The objection to that argument, of course, is that who cares what the theoretical ramifications would be? We don't live in a theoretical world. We live in an actual world. And if you did escape, you could do a lot of good by continuing to instruct your students and inspire others to dismiss sophistry and search for truth in a more genuine way. So there are two sides to every coin, as we're sure to see as we move forward. So where are we going now? Well, we're going to Module 2, and we're going to discuss the topic of epistemology. Now, epistemology is the study of knowledge, how we gain it, what it is, and what we can do with it in a philosophical sense, what we can know. If you read the module overview in the Module 2 learning module materials, it's a really, really good introduction to the nature of the question, how do we know things that we claim to know? From the simplest idea that we know that cardinals are red, to the idea that we know swans are white, or at least we thought we did know that all swans were white, to the larger questions about how can we know anything about the nature of reality? How do we know that we're in this room right now? How do you know that you are where you are and not somewhere else? How do you know you're not dreaming? These things may seem trivial to us because we might say, well, it's obvious. I'm not, somewhere else. It's obvious that I'm here. I know I'm awake. But the further you investigate, you realize that to take an honest and critical philosophical approach to reality requires that we establish certain things about the nature of knowledge, and that we call into question everything that we possibly can in order to come to a genuine understanding of truth. So the problem, as you'll see with knowledge of the world, is that it has to do with perception. And perception is difficult because it's something that happens in here. Not it doesn't happen. Well, I shouldn't say that. It happens through your body, but your experience of that which is perceived happens in your head. So, in the module overview, the movie The Matrix was brought up, and I'm sure everyone's seen that. If you haven't, run to Netflix or wherever else you get your movies and watch it, because it's just about as philosophical as a movie gets, but it's also a pretty good movie. But the nature of the Matrix problem is what we're talking about here. We're talking about, how do you know that you're not just, say, a brain in a vat? Now, when I say a brain in a vat, that's a time-honored philosophical thought experiment. Imagine that a mad scientist comes to your house in the night and injects you in the neck with some, stuff, whatever, and you're knocked unconscious, and you continue to be unconscious. You're in a comatose-like state. He takes you back to his diabolical lab, and he takes your brain out of your head, discards the rest of your body, and puts you in a vat of some nutrient solution that allows your brain to subsist and live. After which, he sets up these little electrical things. I don't know, diodes. That sounds like the right word. He sets up these wires with little electrical signals at the end, and he's transmitting all this electrical information to your brain. And in fact, he set it up in such a way to mimic the electrical signals that your brain gets during normal sensory experience of your normal day. What would happen if that were the case? All of a sudden, you would have an experience of being, say, right where you are right now, seeing things, touching things, feeling things, tasting them, smelling them, everything that you do day in and day out. As long as that mad scientist were able to replicate the information coming in, would you be able to tell that you didn't really have a body? Would you be able to tell that you were just a brain in a vat? Theoretically, no. You wouldn't be able to tell. So, of course, we're led to the question, how do you know that's not the case right now? How do you know that didn't happen yesterday or 10 years ago? And you've been slowly subsisting as a brain in a vat ever since. These are extreme examples, right? But you see the point. Perception happens in here, through the body, but experienced in your brain or in your mind, however you want to call that. So that's like a really big problem of epistemology. How can you know that what you're experiencing as out there, outside your body, is really matching up with the real reality? Like in the movie The Matrix, Neo thought that he was experiencing reality as he saw it, when in reality, really real reality, the world had become a barren wasteland, and he was just in a pod somewhere, receiving, data in his brain that made him think that he was out there in the world. So the nature of knowledge is tricky because of its origins and how it has to get into us. How it gets into our brain is through the body, through perception. Perception is faulty. It can be fooled. So how do you deal with that question? How do you deal with verifying what you know? That's kind of the basic thrust of this module, is coming to an understanding of what it means to know something, to have justified true belief that something is the case, and to provide arguments for why certain types of knowledge are better than others, say. Because, for example, imagine yourself as a brain in a vat, and you're living in this virtual reality, right? You walk up to somebody and somebody says to you, hey, 2 + 2 = 4. Well, you know what? Whether you're a brain in a vat or you're in the real world, that's still true. it's a bit of rational knowledge, right? That is not dependent on sense experience. You can know it purely in and of itself, rationally. What we call in epistemology, it's a priori knowledge. It's prior to experience. You don't need experience to understand that. So there are certain truths that aren't dependent on sense experience. The problem is, say something like, all bachelors are unmarried males. That's true, regardless of sense experience. Whether or not you've seen any bachelors or not, that's true because it's true by definition. It's rationally true. However, the problem is it doesn't tell you much. 2 plus 2 equals 4 doesn't tell you a whole lot either. It just tells you that this side of the equation is the same as that side of the equation. It's not like saying that, Robert Paulson is currently in Paris. That's a bit of information that might be useful to you, and it's not something that can be deduced by purely rational principles. It requires experience, and it requires knowledge that is of the world, not purely knowledge that exists in the mind, like mathematics and logic. So you divide knowledge into two types, and part of the debate in the epistemology, in the world of epistemology, is which type of knowledge is better, which type is more easily come by, and how ought we determine the best way to arrive at all that knowledge. So this is kind of a tough task. The first module, I'll have to say, it was light, it was easy. Now it's starting to get fun. Now it's starting to get a little bit difficult to think about some of these topics, and it's going to make your brain hurt a little bit, which is good. In that spirit, let me talk also right now. I'll leave you with an example of how language is also tied into epistemology, and how when you have the question about whether or not what's in your mind matches up to reality, or what's in here is the same as what's out there, you can get into some tricky situations if your language is is configured in a certain way. For example, let's imagine that aliens came here. Okay, I don't know where they're from far away. They come here and they tell you that they want driver's licenses. And you say, okay, these seem like good people. We can do this. We can give you driver's licenses. And they say, oh, wait a minute. We should tell you one thing, though. You know the color green that you see out in the world? Well, when we see that color, we see what you would call red. And you're like, oh, okay, this is a problem. And they say, that's not all. You know the color red, or what you call the color red? When we see that, we see what you would call green. And you say, oh my gosh, are you telling me that you see red and green reversed? You perceive them as the opposite? And they say, yes. And they say, but there's one more complication. Our word for green is red, and our word for red is green. And they say, can we have driver's licenses now? What do you say to them? Yes or no? Now, if you want to pause and think about it, try and work it out. They see the colors as reversed, but their word for green is red and their word for red is green. Can they drive safely on our roads? If you didn't pause, that's fine. It's complicated. If you did pause and tried to work it out, good job. So what's the answer? The answer is yes, of course. They can have driver's licenses. They see the colors reversed, but their terms are reversed. So in the end, they'll stop at stop signs. If you tell them the rule is you stop when you see red, well, what's going to happen is they say, okay, they'll see a stop sign, right? It will appear to them as green because they see red as green, but their word for that color is red. And so at every stop sign, they'll still be stopping. It's sort of like a mathematical principle, like you multiply two negatives together, you get a positive. That's how it works. Their vision and their perception is switched, but their words are also switched, so it balances out. Now, what's the point of that experiment? What's the point of thinking of it like that? Well, the point of thinking about this is that these aliens could be here right now. In fact, I could be one of them. I could see all red and green reversed. And in my head, my words for them could be reversed too. And none of you, no one in the world would ever know. We couldn't find out. So, epistemologically speaking, the implications of that idea are that, or I should say, is that, the implication is that we, when we form our knowledge about the world, we have to question whether or not that knowledge corresponds to reality and whether or not it's important for knowledge to correspond to reality, or is it simply important for us to have a coherent understanding of our perceptions? So, for example, between us and the aliens, the talk about red and green and stoplights and stop signs created, there was a coherence among our concepts, but there was no correspondence between what they saw and reality. They saw things the wrong way, or perhaps we were seeing it the wrong way, who knows? But we weren't corresponding to reality. Somebody was wrong about how they were seeing it, but it didn't matter because the system was coherent. It worked. So we have to question right now, when we look around the room, I'm sitting here in my kitchen. I'm getting all these perceptions and I'm processing it all, and I'm thinking about whether or not I know that I'm actually here, whether I know that there are 3 windows behind me, whether I know that my daughter's kitchen is sitting over there. Is the reality that's being constructed in my head one that simply is coherent and it works because every time I come back home, all the same perceptions are still here? Or does it actually correspond to what's outside my mind? And how do I know that it does, if I believe that it does? So that's a little primer on epistemology and some of the questions that are going to be arising in this module. It's not easy stuff to think about, and it's kind of difficult to talk about in a meaningful way without a vocabulary. So I encourage you to really pay attention with the readings and try and get through those. And on the discussion board this week, the basic question of epistemology is how do we know what we know is what we're going to discuss. So good luck there, and I will see you all on in your individual threads as I respond. And as usual, if anybody has any questions or would like further clarification on a topic or anything that you find within the module materials, please let me know. All right, good luck this week.